Hey there, welcome to my channel. This is my third basic music theory lesson. Today I'm going to talk about chords. My first lesson was all about the C major scale, how to put it together. The second lesson was about A minor. You really need to see both of those before you can understand this. These are a continuation of that. So if you haven't already seen those videos, I'd recommend going back and watching those in order. I have them all in a music theory playlist. So this one picks up where those two left off. So to recap, I'm going to talk about C major. This was from the first lesson. So in C major, you've got these notes. You've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then you start again on C. So there's only 7 unique notes. So in my first music theory lesson, I discussed what makes this a C major scale. I discussed the intervals between them. Basically, you've got a pattern here, and you've got the space between the interval. You've got either a whole step or a half step. So in this case, in a major scale, you've got a whole step, a whole step, a half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, and a half step. So if you memorize that, you've got whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and that's C major. So let's start out with chords. So every scale has corresponding chords that fit with that scale, and they are comprised of only notes that are in that scale. Okay, so to get the first chord in the C major scale, you're going to take the first note, the root note, and you're going to take every other note. You're going to take the first note, you're going to take the third note, which is an E, and you're going to take the fifth note, which is a G. You're going to skip every other note. And you've got 1, 3, and 5. And those notes, 1, 3, and 5, make up the first chord, which is C major. So I'm going to write those notes down here. So you can see C, E, and G give you a C major chord. The reason that is a major chord is 2 reasons. One, the 1, 3, and 5 position, the first, third, and fifth notes from every major scale is going to give you a major chord of the same name. So you've got the C major chord. So that's an easy way to find any major chord. The other thing that makes this a major chord, another way to understand it, is the intervals between these 3 notes. So if you take C, E, and G, and if I write them down here, the distance between these two and these two will always be the same in every major chord, whether it's C major or D major or F sharp major. It'll always be the same distance. So if you start at C and you go to E, you've got 2 whole steps, and you can see them here. C to C sharp is a half step. You've got another half step there. That makes a whole step. Then you've got another half step and another half step. So you've got 2 whole steps to go from C to E. So you can write the distance in between them right here as 2 whole steps. Okay? Now the distance between E and G is 1.5 steps, and you can see that here. Between E and F, you've got a naturally occurring half step. There's a half step. Then you've got another half step here and another half step here to make a whole step. So you've got 1 1.5 steps. 1.5 steps between E and G. Okay, so that pattern, the distance between these notes, is going to be the same for every major chord, and that will give you that pattern. So that's what makes up a major chord, okay? So let's see, we're going to write major right here. Okay, now let's move on to the D. You've got the D as the first note in the chord. You're going to skip the E, and it's going to be the same pattern for every single chord in this scale. So with a D, you're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to jump over the E, and you're going to take the F. You're going to skip the G and take the A. So you've got D, F, and A. That gives you the second chord in C major. D, F, and A. Now, you could look at these notes and count the steps. And if you want to determine what type of chord that is, and you don't know, you could count the intervals, and you've already got a formula here to make a major chord. So if you start with the D, if you want to know if this is a D major, the first criteria is that between this note and this note has to be 2 whole steps. So you've got the D here, and if you count 2 whole steps, you get that note right there. And that note is not in the C major scale. Okay, that's an F sharp. So that would lead you to the conclusion that that cannot be a major chord because it doesn't fit that formula. So it's something else. What it is it's a minor chord. So the pattern for a minor chord is just like this, but it's just flipped. So if you remember, the pattern for a major chord is 2 whole steps between the first note and the second note, and 1.5 between the second and third. A minor chord is the exact opposite. So if we write over here, we've got the D, F, and A, and the intervals between is opposite. So you've got 1.5 steps, and between the F and the A, you've got 2. And that gives you a minor chord pattern. In this case, it's a D minor. The chord is always named starting with the first note in the chord, so that's a D minor. Well, almost always, but I'll get into that later. That's another topic. But for now, consider that the first note in the chord is going to be in the name. So that's a D minor chord. That's a C major chord. And you can see that 1.5 steps right here. You've got a half step, a half step, and a half step, which is 1.5 steps. And then from the F to the A, you've got 2 steps. And you can see half, 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 and half, which is 2 whole steps. So there's your D minor. There's your C major. You can hear the sound difference, just like between a major scale and a minor scale, like I discussed in my last 2 videos. You've got a different feel, and you can hear that different feel between those 2 different chords. You can hear that sounds kind of upbeat, sounds kind of bright and happy, the major chord, the C major chord. The minor chord sounds a little more subdued, sad. Okay, so what you can see here is the very first chord in the C major scale is a C major chord. So I'm going to write major, M-A-J, above the C, and M, I, N for minor above the D. So one other thing to understand about this is if you look at the C major chord, you know that that is a C major not only for this pattern that I explained, but also just simply for the fact that it's the very first chord in the C major scale. So that's an easier way to remember it. And you don't even need to know this pattern if you just remember that you have to skip every other note. So rather than trying to really remember this and study this, I never remember this. I never think about this pattern. Some people do, and it's a good thing to understand, but you don't really need to really know that when you're actually playing. What I remember more than anything is I remember that I'm skipping every other note. So if I'm in C major and I'm starting on the C, and I know the notes in C major, then I'm skipping every other note, and I don't care about those intervals because I just know that that's a C major. And if you look down and look at it, and you know C major doesn't even have any black keys in it, so you're just looking at the white keys, you can see that pattern of 3 notes, and it stands out very clearly. And that's what I think of in terms of how to make a major chord. Okay? Now, a minor chord, it's the same exact rule. So the D minor chord is also the first 3 notes in the D minor scale. I'm sorry, not the first 3 notes. It's the first, the third, and the fifth notes from the minor scale. So the D minor chord is the very first chord in the D minor scale. And it's following the same rules where you're taking every other note from that scale to get D minor. So that's an easier way to remember. So these are nice to know, but it's much easier to just remember, skip every other note. Okay, so now we're going to move on to E. So we've got E. So we're going to skip every other note. So we're going to start with the E and go to G and to B. We're going to take those 3 notes, and that gives us our next chord. So we'll write that down here. So now you have to figure out what is that chord. And so far, the only ones that we've talked about are major and minor. So if you want to make an educated guess and assume that it might be one of those, you need to figure out which one. And there's a few different ways you could do it. Now, if you listen to the chord and just use your ears, you can hear that that is not a happy sounding chord. Compare it to C major. And now here's D minor. And you hear that slightly sad sound that you're getting from that minor chord. And now listen, compare D minor to the next chord. They sound very similar. They just sound like you're going up a step, but you're not getting a different feeling from that chord. You're getting that same kind of feeling from it. You're getting it sounds kind of like a more of a down, sad sound to it. Okay, so you could guess that that's a minor chord, and you'd be right. That's E minor. But if you don't know, you can use your pattern here, and you know that in a minor chord, you've got 1.5 steps between the first note and the second note. So we can count our steps, and we've got a half step, a half step, and a half step. So that's 1.5 steps between the E and the G. So now we've got 2 steps between the G and the B. And you can see that here. There's a half step, a half step, a half step, and a half step. Or 2 whole steps. So that's a minor chord. Okay, so let's move on to the next chord. So you are going to use that same rule, and you're going to skip every other note. So you're going to take the F, skip over the G and take the A, skip the B and take the C, F, A, C. So that's what you got here. Okay, now if you want to hear that chord, you could make a guess as to how that sounds and try to do it that way. And listen to how that sounds compared to E minor. When you drop from that chord down to E minor, you get a kind of a feeling, and you can hear that sadness in the E minor. And the reason it's standing out so much is because you don't have that here, because it's not a minor chord, and you can hear it. So you can make a guess that that might be a major chord, and it is, and it fits that rule there. So that falls right into the pattern of a major chord. So that's F major. Okay, continuing on, we'll start at the G. Skip every other note. Now, this continues, this pattern, okay, so we're gonna have to jump over here. Do you understand? You'd have after the C, you'd have a D and an E and an F and a G and so on all the way up. So if you're skipping every other note, G is your first note, B is your second note, you're skipping the C, so you're gonna get a D. So you got G, B, and D. Okay, so with G, B, and D, you've got this. There's a G chord, okay? Now, you could use your ears, try to figure it out, compare it to other chords. Whoops, there's your D minor, there's your C major, E minor, F major, and there's the new chord. And we don't have to keep doing this for every chord. I'm going to tell you, you can hear it with your ears. It's a major. It's G major. Okay, we move on to A. We're skipping every other note. If you look down here, you see we're skipping, we got A, we're skipping B, we're going to C. Skipping the D and going to E. So you've got A, C, and E. Ace. Okay, so there's your A chord. And if you count the steps, you're going to find, and if you listen, more importantly, if you listen to it and hear what it sounds like, you're going to find it's a minor chord. So that's A minor. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the B chord. Now, the B chord in C major is special. Starting at the B, we're going to skip the first note, which is a C. We're going to play a D. We're going to skip the E and play an F. So it's following the same rule as all the other chords, skipping every other note. And there it is there. And that's something entirely different than major and minor. So you've got B, you've got D, and you've got F. And if you look at that, you'll notice when you count these patterns here, when you count the intervals, it doesn't match up to this, and it doesn't match up to that. And what it is it's called a diminished chord. Okay. And diminished chords, you're not going to use them as often as you would a major or a minor chord. They do have their purpose. They give you a lot of tension. When you hear that chord, you wouldn't want to listen to that chord for a very long time. It clashes with your ears. It sounds very tense. It gives you, if you stayed on there for a long time, it will be an uncomfortable feeling. But what most people do with it is they use it to transition. They use it as a transition chord to lead into another chord. So in this case, in a major scale, that diminished chord occurs right before you are repeating and jumping back up to the root note of C. So if you were using that chord, it naturally wants to resolve to a C major. And now all of a sudden your ears hear that difference and understand it. And that's what they're usually used for, in my experience, or to provide tension. So there's your pattern, and then starting at C, it would just repeat. So I'm going to draw a line here. Just so you can see the C major scale right there. And you've got all your chords here. C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and that's it, 7 chords. So those are all of the 3-note chords in C major. So now you know how to figure this out. So if you had to look at the piano and you didn't know this, you could over time figure this out with some educated guesses. But when you're playing, you might want to memorize this. You've got another pattern that will really help you to play in a lot of other scales. So in this case, the pattern you want to remember is you're in the key of C major, and if you want to know every single chord that's in this scale, you've got a pattern of chords here. You've got major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, and diminished. So that's what you want to memorize. You want to, and don't even care about what key you're in. Just remember that pattern, because that pattern is the same for every major key, every major scale. So in C major, you've got it right there. So just remember that pattern. You've got, I'll write it down. I don't know if you can see over here. I'll write it down over here. Run out of room. You've got, I'll use a big M for major and a little m for minor. So here's your pattern. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Kind of makes me want M&Ms. But you can memorize that pattern. That's what you'd want to memorize, if anything. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. And that is true in any scale. One other thing I want to cover is that often you will see Roman numerals assigned to chords in any given scale. And so starting from the first chord, they'll say that this is the first chord, which would be 1. The second chord, you've got your third chord here. Your fourth chord, fifth chord, sixth chord, your 7th chord. Okay. In a major scale and in a minor scale, you're going to find that all these chords can be used, and you can experiment and make your own music with them. But the 3 most important chords, and the ones that are used more often in popular music, is the first chord. That's the most important chord because that's the root chord, so you have to use that at some point, or you really aren't in that major scale. So that's the one of the most important ones right here is the 1. The other 2 are the 4 chord and the 5. Okay. What you'll find often is that if you're playing these chords, when you get to the 5th chord, it usually wants to resolve back to the 1st chord. And I can show you what I mean by that. So here I am, I'm on a C major. I'll go to the F major, and then to the G major. And your ear wants to hear a C major after that 5th chord. I'll do it again. C to the 4th chord. When you get to the 5th chord, you want to hear that go back and resolve. So those chords are probably the most important in the scale, but then you can stick the other ones in wherever they feel appropriate. Okay, so another thing to understand is you see very easily how the major chord, it comes right out of the major scale. C major chord comes right out of the C major scale. And it is the first note from the C major scale, and then the 3rd note, and then the 5th note. So you've got the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th note from the C major scale. So often when discussing a chord like C major, and I'll write it right here, C, E, and G, because these notes are the 1st and the 3rd and the 5th notes from the C major scale, people call this note the 1st note in the chord. They call this the 3rd, and they call this the 5th. When referring just to that chord. And what they're really talking about is they're talking about what notes they are in that scale. So this being C major, that's the 1st note in the C major scale, the 3rd note, and the 5th note. And the 1 and 3 and 5 from C major make C major, make the C major chord. In the same way, a minor chord like A minor is the 1st chord in the A minor scale, and it's also the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes from that scale. And if you look at my other 2 videos, I explain how A minor has the same notes as C major, and starting from the A, there's your A minor scale. So if you take the 1st note, you've got your A. If you skip the 2nd and you go to the 3rd note, you've got your C. So you've got 1, you've got 3. And if you skip the D and go to E, you've got the 5th note in the minor scale. So you've got 1, 3, 5 in the minor scale. Okay, so we write that over here. I recommend that you experiment, that you play these chords, listen to how they sound, transition. You can go all the way from C major all the way to an octave up without changing the distance between your fingers. So they're easy to play. All you got to do is find the note for the chord you want to play in C major. So let's say we want to play the G chord. You're just going to put your finger on the G, and you're going to do that pattern. You're going to skip every other note, and then you go. So I'd recommend, while you're experimenting, you can try to play the chords, play around, play a chord with your left hand, and then you can play the notes of the scale with your right hand and pick them out and see how they sound over the chords. The whole purpose of chords is to give you something to harmonize over, to be able to play a melody on top of. It makes the music sound fuller. These intervals between these notes in each chord give different feelings, give different types of tension. Major chord sounds happy, and minor chord sounds more sad. And so as you're transitioning between these chords in a particular key like C major, you're taking somebody through a journey, and they can hear that. They may not understand this theory, but they can hear it, and you're telling a story by putting all your chords together and throwing melodies on top of them. So what I recommend you do is you can just play some chords. You can try playing the same chord with two different hands. I'm playing C major with my left hand. I'm playing it with my right hand at the same time. You can try playing the notes separately. Just experiment. And then you can hold the chord with your left hand and try to play a melody with your right. There's an F major, now a G major, C major, E minor, F major, So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Please check back, subscribe. I'll be posting a lot more videos very soon. If you have any questions or any feedback, please drop me a comment, and have a good one.